What is anonymity anyway? Is it a good thing, and what do we need it for? The whole concept of anonymity on the internet has been very hotly debated, with people weighing in on both sides of the issue. Anyone who works on the receiving end of a crisis telephone line, for example the suicide hotline, knows the power of anonymity. Thousands of people on the internet discuss their personal lives in forums for abuse survivors or AIDS sufferers and so on, and they are only willing to do so through anonymous forums. This is social anonymity, and it's vital for the world's health because it allows people to talk about things they are unwilling to sign their name to. Political anonymity is important too. There isn't, and there shouldn't be any requirement that all political speech had to be signed. Just as someone can do a mass political mailing with no return address, they can do the same over the internet. On the other hand, people are using the anonymity of the internet to send threatening emails, publish hate speech, disperse computer viruses and worms, and otherwise roil the good citizens. In general, there are two types of anonymity. Complete anonymity, which might translate to a letter without a return address, a message in a bottle, a phone call without caller ID or phone tracing. Basically, the person initiating the communication is completely anonymous. No one can figure out who it is, and more importantly, if the person initiates another communication, the recipient doesn't know if it came from the same person. Then there is pseudonymity. Think of a Swiss bank account, for example, although the Swiss banks actually stopped doing this already in 1990. Or think of an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting where you're just known as Bob. It's anonymous in that no one knows who you are, but it is possible to link different communications from the same pseudonym. This is exactly what the Swiss bank needs. It doesn't care who you are, only that you're the same person who deposited the money last week. Or a merchant doesn't really need to know your name, but it does need to know that you legitimately bought the merchandise that you're now trying to return. Anonymity is hard in the cyberspace because so much of the infrastructure is based on identifying you. Microprocessors have unique serial numbers that can be tracked, so do Ethernet network cards. Microsoft Office documents automatically contain information identifying the author. Cookies track people on the web, and even anonymous email addresses can theoretically be linked back to the person by tracking their IP addresses. Superficial anonymity is easy, but true anonymity is probably not possible on today's internet. The notion of pseudonymity brings us to anonymity in financial transactions. It's no one's business, not the government's, not the merchants, not the marketers, what people buy. Unfortunately, there is also a large group of non-vocal proponents of financial anonymity. Drug dealers and other malevolent elements. Can these two sides ever reconcile? Anonymity is more expensive because of the extra risks associated with an anonymous system. Banks aren't stupid, they just prefer a less risky system. So choosing an anonymous payment system is more expensive than a system based on accounts and relationships. The banks could build extra costs in the systems, but their customers usually aren't willing to pay for it. Consider any customer loyalty program. You get a 5% discount if you give us your name and address and let us track your buying habits. People talk as if they don't want mega databases tracking their every spending, but they are willing to get a free frequent flyer affinity card and give all of that data away for 1,000th of a free flight to Hawaii, for instance. If McDonald's offered free burgers for a DNA sample, there would probably be a line around the block. On the other hand, put up a sign saying 5% discount if you give us the name and address of your child's daycare center, and you are likely to get a different reaction. This brings us to an interesting finding. There are some things that most people want to keep private, and then there are people who want to keep most things private. There will always be Swiss bank-style anonymous payment systems for the rich who are willing to pay a premium. But the average consumer isn't one of those people. Average consumers will have personal exceptions, but in general they don't care much about anonymity. And banks have no reason to give it to them, especially while the government is pressuring them not to. Let's look at a different example of personal data, medical records. On the one hand, medical data is only useful if it is shared. Your doctors need to know the medical history of their patient, and aggregate medical data is useful for all sorts of research. On the other hand, medical information is about as personal as it gets. It shows the predisposition to disease, if you've had an abortion, what is the state of your reproductive health, emotional health, psychiatric care, drug abuse, sexual behavior, sexually transmitted diseases, physical abuse, and so on. Inherently, people have the right to keep their medical information private. People have been harassed, threatened, and fired after personal medical information was made public. However, it's not very hard to get this information. In 1995, the Sunday Times of London made a story reporting that the going price for anyone's medical record in England was £200. And these cases are from wealthy countries. Just imagine what kinds of abuses there are in countries like India or Mexico, where a $10 bill can tempt even the most virtuous civil servant. Computerized patient data is very bad for privacy, but it's good for just about everything else, so it's rather inevitable that we use computerized data. This is a big deal, probably as important as the financial and credit databases mentioned previously. We as a society are going to have to balance the need for access, which is much more evident for medical information than financial information, with the need for privacy. Speaking of societies, governments like to paint a picture of privacy as a tool of the four horsemen of the information apocalypse. That is, privacy is a curtain that hides terrorists, drug dealers, money launderers, and child pornographers. Many governments share the view. For instance, the former Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, said that he wanted to ban encryption in the UK. Well, he specifically said, if I am Prime Minister, I will make sure that there is a comprehensive piece of legislation that does not allow terrorists the safe space to communicate with each other. Well, we are lucky that he's no longer the Prime Minister. It might not be self-evident as to why this is an important topic of discussion, so let's look at a couple of stories from the 1990s and learn from history. In 1994, the FBI pushed a bill through the US Congress called the Digital Telephony Bill, which tried to force telephone companies to install equipment in their switches to make it easier for the FBI to wiretap people. In the aftermath of the World Trade Center bombing in 1995, they pushed the Omnibus Counterterrorism Bill, which gave them the power to do roving wiretaps and the president the power to unilaterally and secretly classify political groups as terrorist organizations. Thankfully, this one did not pass. After the TW-8 Flight 800 fell out of the sky in 1996 because of a fuel tank explosion, the FBI played rumors that it was a missile attack and passed another series of measures that further eroded privacy. And years later, this debate is still ongoing. The FBI has been pushing for stronger anti-privacy measures, for instance, the right to eavesdrop on basically anyone in the telephone network, the right to install listening devices on people's computers without warrants wherever possible. These sort of actions pose interesting and timeless philosophical questions. Is the government correct when it implies that social ills of privacy outweigh the social goods? So the benefits of anonymity outweigh the problems. It's the same with privacy. It has many positive uses, and the positive uses are much more common than the negative ones. Can a government take a technology that clearly does an enormous amount of social good, and because they see it as a hindrance to the law, limit its use? According to these examples, encryption is a great hindrance to criminal investigations. However, there is no evidence offered, and the historic record is convincing in showing that wiretaps are not cost-effective crime-fighting techniques. In fact, widespread encryption might be a step back for law enforcement's desires, but it's not a step back in convicting criminals. Now, all this being said, I don't actually know the right answer here. It's just to say that a balance exists between privacy and safety. Laws, regulations, and rights hinder law enforcement and probably result in some criminals going free, but on the other hand, they protect citizens against abuse by the police. We as a society need to decide what particular balance is right for us and then create laws that enforce that balance.